Every year, the world produces 1.4 trillion eggs. 1.4 trillion. That works out to roughly 175 eggs for every person alive. Every single year, produced across facilities on 6 continents. And yet, the genetics inside almost every one of those eggs traces back to 2 companies most people have never heard of, operating out of the Netherlands and Germany. 2 firms, 1.4 trillion eggs. That is the kind of concentration that should make you stop and stare at your breakfast. This is Hungry Empire. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how the most democratic food on Earth became one of the most tightly controlled commodities in the global supply chain, who profits when prices spike, and why a virus in an Iowa barn can double the price of an omelet in Tokyo. The egg has been with us for 10,000 years. Every civilization that kept chickens understood the same basic math. A hen lays, you eat. For most of history, eggs were local. Your neighbor had chickens, the farm down the road had chickens, and the price of eggs was whatever your neighbor felt like charging. There was no egg empire because there was no way to build one. The bird did what the bird did, and the market followed. What changed that was genetics. Specifically, the industrial ambition to engineer a hen that would outperform every hen that had ever lived. In the mid-20th century, poultry science entered a new phase. Researchers began applying the same selective breeding logic that had transformed corn and soybeans to the humble laying hen. The goal was relentless. More eggs, laid faster, on less feed, in less space. And it worked. A commercial laying hen today produces somewhere between 300 and 320 eggs per year. Her great-grandmother, a century ago, managed perhaps 150. That is a doubling of output, achieved not through magic, but through decades of careful selection, crossbreeding, and proprietary genetic lines developed by a handful of specialized firms. Here is what is most surprising about this story. It is not the chicken farmers who hold the real power. It is the breeders, the companies that own the genetic blueprints. Because if you control which birds produce the parent stock, you control what every chicken farmer on Earth is actually raising, whether they know it or not. By the early 21st century, that control had consolidated down to essentially 2 companies. Hendrix Genetics, headquartered in Boxmeer, the Netherlands, and EW Group, based in Germany. Together, they own the parent stock genetics for the vast majority of the world's commercial laying hens. That means when a farmer in Ohio, or Thailand, or Brazil buys day-old chicks to stock a new laying facility, the grandparents of those birds almost certainly came from a Hendrix or EW breeding program. The farmer owns the chickens. The recipe for those chickens belongs to someone else entirely. Think about what that means. Every link downstream in the chain, from the pullet grower who raises the young hens, to the commercial layer operation, to the packing facility, to the supermarket shelf, all of it rests on a genetic foundation controlled by 2 European firms. The egg in your refrigerator right now is the end product of a lineage engineered in a Dutch or German laboratory. Genetics is one layer of control. Production is another. And in the United States, the world's second-largest egg market, production has its own concentration story. 4 companies dominate American egg supply. Cal-Maine Foods, based in Mississippi, is by far the largest, producing close to 1 in 5 shell eggs sold in the country. Rose Acre Farms in Indiana, Versova, and Hillendale Farms round out the top tier. Together, these 4 operations control close to half of all commercial egg production in the United States. They run some of the largest laying facilities in the world, operations housing millions of birds, optimized for scale, cost, and throughput. Put yourself in the shoes of a small egg farmer. You are competing against operations that buy feed in volumes that get bulk discounts you cannot touch, that have logistics networks built to serve national retail chains, and that have the capital to absorb a bad quarter. The math does not favor you. This consolidation did not happen overnight. It was the product of 40 years of quiet acquisition, bankruptcy absorption, and economic pressure that squeezed out smaller producers. What that left behind was a market that looks competitive on the surface. You walk down the egg aisle and see a dozen different carton designs. But many of those brands, regional names, store-label products, specialty lines, trace back to the same handful of producers. The diversity is largely cosmetic. And then the virus arrived. Across 2022 and into 2023, highly pathogenic avian influenza swept through American poultry flocks with a ferocity not seen in decades. By the time the worst of it had passed, more than 50 million birds had been lost across the country, with roughly 40 million of those being commercial laying hens. 40 million hens gone. In an industry already running near full capacity, with tight margins and consolidated supply, that was a catastrophic shock to the system. The numbers were stark. In January 2022, a dozen large eggs at a major American retailer cost just under $2 on average. By January 2023, that same carton was approaching $5 in many markets. The Bureau of Labor Statistics recorded a year-over-year increase in egg prices of roughly 70%, the steepest in decades. That shows up in a family's weekly budget. Here is the uncomfortable part, and we will say it plainly. The concentration of American egg production did not cause the avian flu, but it absolutely amplified the price shock. When supply is distributed across thousands of independent farms, a regional outbreak is a regional problem. When it is concentrated in a handful of mega operations with interlocking supply chains, a regional outbreak becomes a national crisis in a matter of weeks. The structure of the industry turned a disease event into an inflation event. Here is what the earnings reports showed during that same period. Cal-Maine Foods reported quarterly profits in late 2022 that were more than 20 times higher than the same quarter the prior year. 20 times. The company's net income for fiscal year 2023 came in at roughly $760 million, compared with around $130 million the year before, a nearly six-fold jump. Shareholders were rewarded. Small egg farms that had been hit by avian flu went bankrupt. The consolidation deepened. What do you think? When one company controls 20% of a nation's egg supply and books $750 million in a single year, while consumers pay double or triple the normal price, is that the market working as intended, or is it something else? Drop your answer in the comments. Most people assumed prices would normalize quickly once flocks were rebuilt. The evidence told a different story. Restocking a laying operation takes time. A replacement chick takes roughly 5 to 6 months to begin laying, and replacement chicks became scarcer and more expensive as the industry scrambled to rebuild. The supply shock had a long tail, and the companies best positioned to ride it out were the ones that had never lost their scale advantage in the first place. By mid-2023, prices did begin to ease in most American markets. But the episode left something behind. A clearer picture of how the egg supply chain actually works, and what it looks like when it breaks. The genetic layer barely registered in public conversation. That is the more important long-term story. Avian flu outbreaks, however devastating, are temporary. Genetic concentration is structural. When two companies hold the parent stock for most of the world's commercial laying hens, any disruption to those breeding programs, whether from disease, regulatory action, or geopolitical tension, could ripple through global egg supply in ways that make the 2022 price spike look modest. There is a detail in this story that stuck with me when I first dug into it. Hendrix Genetics and EW Group are not household names. They do not advertise to consumers. They do not appear on egg cartons. Most chicken farmers around the world work with their products daily without ever thinking about the Dutch or German firms behind the birds they raise. The architecture of control in this industry is almost perfectly invisible to the people living inside it. And invisibility in food systems is usually where the real power hides. The egg is heading into a new period of pressure. Lab-grown alternatives are still niche and expensive. Plant-based egg substitutes have captured a small but growing slice of the market. More immediately, a second major wave of avian influenza in 2024 triggered further culls in the United States and across parts of Europe and Asia, adding fresh stress to a supply chain that had barely finished rebuilding from the last one. Cal-Maine and its peers began reporting elevated prices again before the year was out. Meanwhile, European regulatory pressure on cage-free housing, which the United States has also been moving toward, under pressure from major retail chains and ballot initiatives, is raising production costs across the industry. The transition from conventional cages to cage-free systems requires capital investment that large producers can absorb, and small ones often cannot. Each wave of regulation, however well-intentioned, has historically accelerated consolidation by filtering out producers who cannot afford the upgrade. By 2026, based on corporate pledges and state mandates, roughly half of all eggs sold by major American retailers are expected to come from cage-free facilities. That is a genuine improvement in animal welfare. It is also a structural change that is quietly making the Big Four bigger, because they are the ones with the balance sheets to build new barns. Every empire we have covered on this channel shares a common shape. A resource the world cannot do without. A supply chain most people never think about. And a concentration of control that sits just below the surface of the everyday product. The egg is no different. It is humble. It is universal. And somewhere behind it, 2 genetics firms in Europe and 4 producers in America are running numbers you will never see on the carton. Look at the food around you. Every label hides a supply chain, and every supply chain hides a power structure. We are coming for all of them. If there is an everyday food you want us to expose next, name it in the comments. Follow Hungry Empire and watch what gets uncovered.